I am Jim Collison, and this is Gallup's Call to Coach, recorded on December 1st, 2022. Call to Coach is a resource for those who want to help others discover and use their strengths. We have Gallup experts and independent strengths coaches share tactics, insights, and strategies to help coaches maximize the talent of individuals, teams, and organizations around the world. If you're listening live and you don't see the chat room, there's a link right above me to it. Click on that, join us and chat with your questions. If you have questions after the fact, you can always send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. Don't forget to subscribe to Call to Coach on your favorite podcast app right over there on YouTube so you never miss an episode. Robert Gabsa is our host today. Robert is a workplace consultant with Gallup out of our Atlanta office. And Robert, always great to have you on Call to Coach. Welcome back.
Well, thanks for having me, Jim. It's so good to see you. We don't get to see each other enough, not even in person as much as even through our screens. But thanks for having me.
Yeah.
This is exciting.
Good to have you. Last time we saw you it's hard to believe, was 2 years ago. We were spending time talking about building strengths-based cultures. You and I did a 5-part series on that, and it was good. It was a good time. We refer to it often. It's been one of those series that as people ask, like, how do I do this? I'm like, hey, we have a 5-part series for you. And so thanks for doing that. You're busy enough. You're hard to get on here, but give us a little idea what just so folks can catch up with you. One, tell us your top 5, and then let us know what have you been working on?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I lead with ideation. I always consider that the spoke of the wheel because there's not much that happens without that being at the center of things. I have Woo number 2, futuristic, strategic, and maximizer. And I always say, not very far behind all of those are my communication, adaptability, self assurance, relator, and of course, competition.
And what's been keeping you busy? Are you working with the leaders these days?
There's no doubt. I mean, there's no doubt. This year has been just a tidal wave of getting back together again. Hey, we're back together as a team. We haven't seen each other in a couple of years. Our leadership team, our executive leadership team, we're all getting together for our conference or whatever meeting it is, and we need help. Yeah, we need to talk about some things because it's different. We're in a new world. We're in a new reality. The workplace is undergone changes that are really unprecedented. I think as far as in my career, so they're facing a lot, and we have been in our area in my particular team, um, really record breaking. We can't keep up with it. It's been fantastic to get back out there. With Woo and communication, I love to be in front of a room. I love to be with people. And so that's been really fun. The travel is that comes along with it can be a little wearing. So be careful what you wish for. But no, it's been busy. It's been busy working on what most people are facing right now. And I think it's important that we keep our eye on not just the tried and true best practices about leadership, about managing people, about employee experience that we've known about and studied for decades, but what's going on right now, what's on their desk right now, and that's the
Mhm.
conversations that are being had, and so more of our sessions have been customizing to specific topics that they're facing.
Yeah, no surprise as we looked at the data and launched this brand new Clifton Strengths for Leaders report. We know from It's the Manager that our managers, our leaders are under fire.
Yeah.
Now is the time. Every story I read is about burnout or quiet quitting or
Mm.
quiet firing or quiet whatever,
Yeah.
all these things that are happening in the workplace, right? We're in turmoil. And it's really going to be leaders that pull us out of that, right? I mean, it's really going to be a leader's responsibility to pull us out of that. But one of the questions, and we just got this on Facebook like 10 minutes ago, the difference between a leader and a manager. And let's talk a little bit about that. And let's set the stage with this as we think about leadership. Everybody always like, oh, how's that different from being a manager? Robert, what are your thoughts on that as you think about those two roles?
Hmm. Interesting question. I love the question. I actually had to do a session for a client specifically on that, right? as some managers had been promoted to being managers of managers, so now they're considered leaders. And I think there's so many definitions of leaders. I think of it as, when I talk to groups, a leader is definitely not a title, right?
Mm, mhm,
It's not a position in a hierarchy. Even though I think I mentioned earlier, if we were to just look at the masses and say, okay, as a blanket statement, what is the masses? They look at it as a hierarchy, right? Leaders are more the executives, the C suites, and the senior vice presidents, and then the managers are kind of below that, and different companies separate those. So I get that, but I also, especially in the time that we're in, one of the things that I like to differentiate is, managers look more inward, right? It's more of the day to day, the people on their teams, the deliverables, the getting things done. What's happening with projects, with things that are kind of happening within the organization, specifically on a more, not only a day to day. I mean, managers have to think further out. I get all that, and I think leaders are more responsible for looking outward, and what is the community see about that organization? What is partners? What maybe it's governments, right? Maybe it's outside entities and other stakeholders, and of course a lot of the higher level C levels, they're really looking at what's happening with supply chains and economics and all of those macro things. I think that affect the organization is also something that differentiates. But there was a quote that Peter Drucker had that has always stuck with me, and that you know managers, it's what do you say? Management is doing things right. Leadership is doing the right thing.
mm,
So I think leaders are really responsible for a lot more of what managers deliver when it comes to things
mm,
like culture, right? When it comes to things like mission, like purpose, the things that help guide us. Leaders are more responsible for painting the picture of what is the North Star.
mm,
How do we make decisions around here? What guides us? And these shouldn't just be words. They shouldn't just be statements, right? They need to be seen in actions. And so, I often say, and there was a quote I think by John Maxwell, if you're a leader but nobody is following you, well, then you're just out for a walk.
mm,
And
mhm,
that's so true, because how many leaders, including yourself, right, don't have direct reports, right? Being a leader, I think, is much more, not as is much more about the bigger picture, and I think that's apparent than the
mhm,
tactical. Let's get things done. Um, but I think it's an important place, and we've heard plenty of great quotes about, in books, leaders eat last, and all of those things. And one of the things that that I also think about when I ask leaders, when I'm working with a team of quote unquote leaders, and I ask them to think about a great leader, someone in their life, could be anybody, right, who inspired them to be their best. What are the characteristics of that person? And when people think about that leader, they think about a lot of different people. They think
mhm,
about friends, they think about coaches, they think about people, colleagues, they think about people in their faith organizations, right? So what they're thinking about is, who has inspired me to be my best. So I often will challenge them and say, if you're a leader and you don't come to mind when people think about great leaders in their life, then you haven't reached the pinnacle of your leadership potential. And so I mean, that's my 2 cents on how I would differentiate them a bit. But I also say managers, a lot of managers are leaders, and almost all leaders are in some way or shape or form a manager. And if you look definitionally, manager of other people, right? Because most leaders do, but not all do. I think it's more about how you inspire people and organizations to reach excellence.
Yeah, I'm kind of glad we don't spend a lot of time defining them strictly. I see them as two big bubbles that overlap a lot.
Definitely.
And I think the conversation, the coaching conversation that goes on around that of those roles, those responsibility, we see our two reports as two separate roles, written and influenced by two different people. Mike McDonald on the management side,
Hmm.
who spends a lot of time thinking about managers and their people and their engagement, and Therese
Yep.
Nisbet, who spends a lot of time coaching, like you do, spends a lot of time coaching executives and leaders in organizations, and yet in your role, you do a little bit of both. You know
Yeah.
how those bubbles kind of how do they come together? Let me ask you this question on behalf of the certified coaches and coaches in our
Yeah.
community. We're going to talk a little bit about coaching leaders here a little bit later, but what's the we titled this improving your leadership skills as a coach. How do you think what's important is you're a coach and you're leading others, right? What talk a little bit about how you see that coaching role fit into this leadership idea, and what kind of leadership does a coach bring to an organization, do you think?
Well, I think coaches, when I try to help organizations and when I see other coaches help organization as leaders themselves, um, their heads are up. Just like again, a leader is someone who takes their eyes off of the fire on their desk and looks up at the people in front of them. I think coaches, do the same thing.
Mhm.
They're there to look at the people. They're there to look at what is really going on, not just in the organization, but with the people. Now, some coaches, let's face it, act also as consultants, right? Where they're the experts and they're going to give advice when it comes to a business challenge, specifically when it comes to certain structures or technology. But when you're really sitting in the coaching seat, right? You're really thinking about how do we get people to be the best versions of themselves? How do we get them to increase the awareness of their natural talents? How to understand how they've helped them, even through times of change or times of disruption or turbulence or whatever you want to call it. How has that happened? How have they used that before? Um, how might it be getting in their way? The whole idea of helping and hindering and that theme awareness when it comes to our strengths, right? I think is critical right now because, when this first started, it was interesting. When this literally within the first month of that March 13 day, I remember thinking, and I talked to Dr. Harder very briefly. As a matter of fact, I think it was just through like a Teams chat, and I said, how is this going to play out just with managing other people when now we've got this move towards things like remote working, because some managers are really good naturally and they've developed it and they've worked on it and they're really good at managing people that are sitting in front of them, and now those people are not, they're having to manage them from afar. Some managers may do better at that than they did physically, and some may struggle, right? So now we may have a shift in what is a good manager. And he agreed there, that is yet to be seen. His intuition, and I don't want to quote him or have anybody write this down and say this is what Dr. Harder said,
Mm.
but when I look back and talk to him and Dr. Asplin, their sense was, especially Asplin, he said, my sense is people will lean more into their natural talents. They'll lean into their strengths
Mhm.
when they're hit with this, because let's face it, that's where natural talent, that's where our strengths live, right? They live in our limbic system, which is our fight or flight, our natural reaction. Where do we go when things get tough? Is we go to who we are, and for the most part. But that varies between people depending upon what's happening. I mean, there's
Mhm.
a lot of challenges. They're facing a lot of challenges.
Let's talk about those briefly. Talk about this. I don't know if anybody would be shocked by any of these, but as we think about the current environment today, December 2022, let's spend just a few minutes talking about what are you seeing? What are the headwinds for our leaders today?
Let's just say the big word, even though it's overused, is change. Right? We've talked about
Mhm.
change management and change transformation and culture transformation. We've talked about that for years and years and years. But if I were to say change, this is change in a different at a different level, right? This is change in on steroids. It's change to a disruptive, and it's not just COVID. It wasn't just the pandemic. I mean, if you think about the last couple of years, people again thinking as a coach and directed at what people are going through, which is what leaders should be doing as well. They have to manage the organization, but right now one of the biggest challenges that they're facing through all of this change is things like retention, right? We're losing people. The whole, like you mentioned earlier, the great resignation, quiet quitting. I mean, what's the quiet firing? What's the term of the month that they're having to react to, that they're having to consider, that they're having to learn about? Because heaven forbid, you're at a town hall and someone says, talk to me about quiet quitting or quiet firing, and they don't know what that means, or they're not up. They have a lot more on their shoulders besides the obvious. I've got remote workers. I've now got a hybrid environment. I don't know what's fair, what's not fair. I've got people that are disgruntled because some get to work from home, some don't. I've got to come in. Why does that person not? Blah, blah, blah. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that I'm hearing over and over and over is we're struggling with that. And one of the things that I think it boils down to, besides the tactical, technical, more intentional. If one thing you can do as a coach is get your client to think and you be more intentional about walking them through how they've gotten through this,
Mm. Mm.
you know, because at the pinnacle of all of this is, as we know, one of the most important things that an organization has is its culture,
Mhm.
right? And I think there's as many cultures in an organization as there are managers. But if you have a company culture, if you have your mission, vision, and values, whatever you have, whatever you want to label them, whatever you want to call them, your pillars or whatever, everybody's got their guiding principles and all of this. Whatever they are, you know, how do you keep them intact when people aren't living them?
Mhm.
You know,
Mhm.
I mean, Jim, I was at a thing, at a session out on the West Coast, 50 people in the room, and about 44, 45 of them, it was the first time they would met their colleagues in person.
Mm.
They were recruited, hired, onboarded, all online, all virtually. How do you keep culture a part of that? Because people are still, let's face it, onboarding can last 9, 12 months. Some studies say that people are thinking about whether they made the right decision even 18 months into the job. So how
Mhm.
do you keep people feeling that the culture they joined is it makes sense for them? And I think a leader's responsibility weighs a lot into that. And that again, it comes right down to the people,
Yeah.
right? Not just the environment, because bean bags and ping pong tables and all of that's eye candy. That's not culture. Culture is really how you show up every day and how you
Mhm.
live every day.
Yeah, consistent culture, right? It
Right.
it being consistent across the organization and across teams. Because if you get too, I mean, yes, there's some conversation going on in the chat room. Yes, managers have a big impact on a company culture, but if
Sure.
you leave it up to the individual manager to decide what that culture is going to be, you might have 17 different cultures, or 20, or as many managers as you have. And I think it's really, really important that we get everybody on the team thinking the same, or thinking, living in the same culture.
Absolutely. It needs
One
to
of the
ladder up, right? Managers
Yeah,
need to ladder up to whatever a
yeah,
company culture
right,
is.
right,
But
right.
as well as I do, there are some managers that people want to work for, and there are some that they want to run from. So when I say that managers really have a lot of control over the culture on their team,
Yeah.
it still has to carry out the culture of the
Mhm.
company, but how that feels on that team can be very different.
Yeah,
And we see
yeah.
that in our engagement work, right? We see some teams that have super high engagement, low turnover, low absenteeism, and we see others that have the opposite, yet they're in the same company under the same culture.
Yeah, Yeah. I think the culture starts, and we're going to talk about some considerations as we think about, our leadership, our leaders that are out there. But I think that culture starts with onboarding. And I think
Oh yeah.
coaches have the ability, as we think about, improving our own coaching leadership skills, have an opportunity. I think sometimes we come in and we try to hit the thing midship. We try to hit it right in the middle with strengths, and not that saying anything is bad, but I think organizations making an organizational impact can start, especially as we think about one of these considerations of massive turnover in a lot of organizations. You just mentioned it. We're getting back together for the first time. Hey, I even just changed teams at Gallup, and my manager said, do you want to re-onboard yourself? Like, maybe there's been enough
I like
people
that.
coming in, maybe you should re-onboard. and
I like
and
that.
Robert, how important in your work and what you're seeing it getting that onboarding right, not just for the new folks, but I'm even a big advocate for teams re-onboarding now again to say, "Hey, we've completely changed. Let's onboard. Let's do it as a team so we all know each other." I know. Any thoughts on that?
Oh, my only thought is yes, please, because I'll never forget the first call I got. Robert, you've worked with us before. Our team's been away. We're back together. We're live again. We're in the office again, but it's different.
Yeah,
I don't know. And I say, you know what? You're right. It is because guess what? You're different. And
yeah,
all of those people are different. Everybody, I don't care what you say, has changed over the past 2 years in some way due to something. And so that's why more than ever you start hearing about well-being. We start hearing about, that the our some of our latest work on stress, sadness, anger, worry being at some of their highest levels, right, in a decade. People are going through it. Yeah, football players. I'm watching football this Sunday, and you've got commercials now and little vignettes on athletes that are coming out saying, you know what? It's okay not to be okay. It's okay. We know that it's been a tough time. We know things have changed. And if we ignore that, then we're ignoring people. We're ignoring our followers, right? We're not doing enough asking. We're not listening with the intent to understand. And then we're not doing anything with that information. And right now, the four needs of followers haven't changed, right? And especially now, compassion, hope, stability, and of course, trust. Now, how those are displayed, how those are exemplified may be different than they were, but they're still extremely critical, if not more critical, right? And I'm seeing that the leaders who are showing a little bit more of that. I had a guy that literally said, Robert, before this happened, he's a sales leader. He said, if I had somebody on my team that wasn't making their numbers, 1 month, okay, 2 months, 3 months, I might have said, you better pick up your numbers because there's a lot of people that want this job.
mhm,
He said, now when that person came in, I said, how are you? How you doing? This isn't like you. What's anything I can help you with, right? That changes how people feel. And when you change how people feel, you change how they perform, right?
yeah,
There's a direct correlation there. And so, as leaders think about, and as the book that our CEO John Clifton just put out, he makes a very good point. We focus in leaders, and I'm talking now. We'll use the blanket definition, but they talk about and they focus on unemployment rates and CO2 emissions and the financial markets and the size of urban slum populations and market collapses and all of these things that make headlines. But are they studying when anger is rising or when stress is
mhm,
going up or how people are
mhm.
worrying and how's that affecting their organization? It comes down to the business and they're responsible for that. And I tell more and more organizations, sorry to put the onus on you, but especially as Gen Z is coming into the workforce, and we already knew it with with millennials, right? They're expecting organizations to be a part of their lives, to be a part of their growth, their development, to be a to be responsible for their life experience, not just their work experience. Right? I remind people, employees don't come to work every day. Get that out of your head. The whole person comes to work every day,
Yeah.
and focus on that whole person. Otherwise they're not going to be followers. And if you don't have followers, you're not a leader,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right?
Couple comments from chat. Let me bring these in because I think they apply. Sean says, "Hey, Robert, great to see you. Can you talk about the combination of strengths and engagement to help organizations deal with both culture and leadership?" So I want to use that as a setup for Michael's question, which is, would data from the Q12 help leaders identify which aspects of, we were talking about re-onboarding, right? Which is re-engaging really in this context, that need the most attention as we think about leaders and considerations for those leaders thinking about a new world, so to speak. How might they, as you think about engagement and the work that you're doing, how might they use some of that to re-engage or to re-onboard?
Well, how they relate first. We we've said for a long time that engagement is the why, right? That's the why. Performance or outcome, whatever that is, that's the what. And we know higher engagement, the higher the what, the higher the performance. Strengths is one of the hows, right? All the data connects to each other. When people are acting in their strengths and doing what they do best, right? That's on the Q12. Cares about me as a person. And the one that seems to be linking most strongly, and we just had a white paper on this, I don't know, maybe a month ago, is Q10, right? The best friend at work, and how people are losing that feeling of connection with their colleagues. And some of them, when they get there, I've gone to some uh, results briefings with executive teams. Our Q10 has gone down. Does that mean people don't like each other anymore? And I reminded them the Q12 results. It's not a report card. It's a compass. If there's a reason why things go up or down, take those into consideration. Tell me why Q10 may have gone down. Didn't you say earlier this morning that 40% of your workforce has never even met each other in person? Do you think maybe that affected this best friend at work question? Oh, yeah, that's possible. They haven't had a chance to form friendships. They haven't had a form to get that support, to feel those connections. And it's really hard. And I think I advise that coaches help organizations think of intentional ways. And I have a variety of tactical things that I do or suggest of how you get people connected on a human level. We have to bring humanity back. We've lost some of that. We just have. And we've gotten back, and a lot of companies have gotten into the wow, well, we lost money, we lost revenue, we had to lay people off, we had to close stores, and they're looking at their numbers and they're looking at their financials, and they're not looking at their people. And they just have to. Though in my opinion, that's gonna make or break the companies that are successful moving forward. But those are some of the questions I would look. Some of the Q items that I would look. They're not questions. I always say that. Like I call them questions, and there's not a question mark in any of them. They're statements that you agree or disagree with. But I would say those are key. But Q10 on the onboarding one is how do you connect people? And so more and more, assign them a buddy, assign them a mentor, have someone that they check in with personally, that they can talk with and vent with and ask where the files are or whatever, right? And feel like they don't have to go and wonder who I talk to and feel weird about it, that they've got a buddy. It's the buddy system. It's been around forever. We did it in first grade.
Mm-hmm.
It works.
Yeah, it was an important concept in the military when I was there, right? We called them ranger buddies, right? There was
Yeah,
somebody, it's somebody who had your back, right?
that's
Um,
it.
I have to admit, Robert, I gave up on that during the pandemic. I was really good about, I latched onto a few people. We set up Friday happy hours that were virtual. So Friday at 4, Friday at 4:30, we'd get together on Zoom, enjoy a beverage, whatever, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I did that consistently. And there were some folks every Tuesday morning, I would call someone, like these very consistent things. as we came out and well, in the last year, regardless of where we are, right, in this
Yeah.
pandemic thing, I thought it was over. I thought the war was over. I was like, oh, yeah, I don't need these anymore. And I canceled them. And it was a huge, now today, I'm seeing that was a huge, gigantic mistake because I haven't replaced them. I've been going in more often, but I haven't replaced those times with, I haven't been intentional about finding new connections in that. And it's affected me in some ways. I'm like, oh, I'm kind of not connected like I used to be, or I don't have this buddy, so to speak, that I used to have. And I think as we think about considerations, yes, there's been all this change. I think some folks have wanted to go back, and maybe this was my case. I wanted to go back. I was ready to go back. Okay, I'm ready to go back to the way it was. That way is gone, right?
No,
That's
yeah. You know what? Your natural inclination as people have, and I've seen out there, and I pose the question. We may feel like we're out of the pandemic,
Mhm.
but is the pandemic out of you? And it really isn't out of anybody, and it may never be, or it may not be for a long time. But I've also heard that, sometimes things like this get people to band together.
Mhm.
And I've heard just yesterday, I was talking with the university, and he said, we came out of this as a stronger team, as a stronger organization. I said, yeah, some do. It's called post-traumatic growth. Because when disruption or something happens, what happens is people hit this right, and they start getting these feelings, and they range from just, I'm at baseline functioning, and then this event happens, and now I'm vulnerable, and I start going into feeling helpless and hopeless, and then I kind of learn how to function, and now I improve my functioning, and I'm getting back up, right? And some people get back up, but they never get back up to baseline. That's called basically PTSD, and they stay there. Some people get back up to baseline and kind of like what most people do, literally, I think 60%, 62%, just kind of get back to homeostasis. But there's about 20% that go and actually come out of it better, to have grown, learned, and developed, and that's called post-traumatic growth. And there's a lot of stuff out there on this. This isn't a Gallup thing, but when that happens, it's because people were also very intentional. You have to be intentional. I use that word more and more and more. When we started this, our team, I came up with something I called Take Five, and it came off of a thing that I did with my college roommate, Greg Goodrich. And Greg and I got caught in that, would see the name pop up on our phone. And I'd say, oh, I haven't talked to Greg in forever, but I just don't have that time right now because it's gonna be a conversation. So I
Mhm.
would hit decline. He said, man, I do the same thing with you. And I said, well, why do we do that? How about we make a rule? When I see your name, I'm going to answer it. 5 minutes is the time limit. I don't care if we're in the middle of a sentence. We say, okay, 5 minutes is up. Goodbye. See ya. And we're off. No hard feelings.
Yeah.
And we started doing that. And next thing you know, we were talking every week, sometimes multiple times a week. And so our team started doing that. It was, you have to do 2 take 5s with a colleague every week, 10 minutes a week. That's all. No one, if you say you don't have time to do that, you've got other problems, right?
Mhm.
And so we started doing that as a team. And I started reaching out and doing take 5s with people in Asia, in Europe, people that I had never actually talked to one on one. 5 minutes, got to know them a little bit. It kept us connected through that. And yeah, we started to kind of ease off of it as we got busy. But there's a few of us that still do. You'll see the little Microsoft Teams come up. Take 5 question mark. Sure, I've got 5 minutes. I can back away from this
Yeah.
PowerPoint I'm doing. And those 5 minutes, or at the beginning of a meeting, everybody go into a breakout room. Take 5 minutes. Talk about the most positive thing you did this weekend. We have to get back to those things. And because what
Yeah.
happens is, people are saying, we get on our calls, we get to Zoom. It's like, okay, what's the first thing on the agenda? And we're not doing that pre-meeting connecting that we used to do around the conference table.
I love setting that expectation. It's 5 minutes. Like I love take five. We call them quick connects in our structure,
Yeah,
right? Of the
yeah.
5 coaching conversations, we call those quick connects. But I love setting that 5 minute idea. Like, hey, this is just going to be a 5 minute call. It's not. We're not going to go on forever here. In I think for leaders helping their teams know. yeah, this is just a 5-minute call. I'm just checking in. Like, I just want to know how you're doing. I want 5 minutes of you telling me how you're doing is a little bit different than can you meet with me? Right? Because how everybody gets a
Yeah.
little sideways when a leader says, you got,
Yeah.
you got a few minutes,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, of course I
Uh,
do. Of course
yeah.
I do. Right. But we've
Yeah.
also gotten
Yeah.
gotten we've also gotten kind of chained to the fact that because we have, Outlook, everything has to be 30 or 60 minutes.
Right. Yeah, right. No, that's a good
No,
point.
they
Yeah.
don't. And they don't even have to be calls, and they don't have to be Zoom calls. Remember when we used to use that thing called the phone?
I'm terrible at that.
It's like we feel like every time now, well, it's got to be a Teams call, it's got to be a Zoom call. I've got
I
to
feel
turn my
like
camera
doing
on.
doing this is wrong somehow, when you bring the phone up to your face,
I
you
know,
know?
right? I think even John Clifton had said something somewhere. Call each other.
Yeah, right,
Just stop
right.
the IMing and stop the
Yeah,
texting and stop the
yeah.
email chains. Call somebody and say, I have a quick question. My
Mhm.
rule with Take Five was can't talk about anything work related.
Mm.
And once in a while, I'll get can we do a Take 50?
Yeah, you
Because
need them. You need
you
them.
need those too.
You
But
do.
but you have to be intentional. And I always I think as a coach, when I also coach leaders, I remind them because most of them have the poorest excuse, I don't have time.
Mhm.
And I say, you know how you can make time? Schedule an hour with nothing. Schedule an hour for yourself every week, just like it's a meeting, and take time to think, write a note, jot down or whatever. The one of our former clients who's now runs the Bellagio Hotel sends an email to thousands of employees every morning. He's done it for almost 20 years. And it's from him. It's 2 sentences. It's here's my thought of the day. And they all feel like they're at least a little connected in where other people are like, I have never received a direct email or even a blanket email from my CEO if it's not something that's a policy or whatever.
Mhm. Yeah.
Sometimes it's just don't forget to smile today. Have a great one.
Yeah.
You thought of
Yeah.
me. I don't know.
It's a touch base. We hear from John and Jim, pretty
All the
frequently
time.
in our
I think so.
organization, right? Yeah, and it's great to hear from them. Unless you've done something wrong. No, just kidding. Sure. As we think about coaching leaders, and I kind of want to think in this last segment about some helpful thoughts for coaches listening as we're coaching leaders. Teresa kicks us off nicely with a question she asked in the beginning, and she said, when leaders say one thing and then behave differently, i.e., we're an organization that supports women and minorities, but treat people differently, how can we help managers lead from the middle? Like when we think about that consistency problem, that might be we have this stated culture, but the leadership is not matching that culture. How, as coaches, can we help? And maybe even in our own coaching practice, we say one thing and we actually coach differently. But
Oh yeah.
how do we deal with that inconsistency, Robert? What do you think?
You know, I say get behind the words. Right.
Mhm.
I'll ask I'll ask some of my clients, how do you approach leadership? Write down 3 words that describe how you approach leadership, and they'll write those words down. I'll say, okay, now I want you, and if I'm doing this with a group, the one thing we immediately find is that they're all positive words, almost, and they're all very different, right? So we approach it differently, and that's okay. There's no one way to approach leadership, right? You have to do it the way that comes most naturally to you. But I'll say, out of those 3 words, circle the one that you would say your team or people in your organization, if they had to vote, which one would they say they see in your behavior most
Mm,
often?
mm,
And now I want you to talk about what is that behavior specifically. Give me an example of a time you did X, Y, or Z. Because when people say, I'm caring, I go, but that doesn't tell me anything about your, does that mean you hugs in the hallway? I don't know what that means.
mhm.
What do you do to show people you care? I'm trusting. How do you know people trust you? Some people trust you unless you give them a reason not to. Other people don't trust you unless you give them a reason to. Do you know who those people are? No. Then how do you know that you're being trusted, right? So I think it's what is the behavior behind the word? Stephen Shields, one of my colleagues who you know and love very dearly, he calls them filmable moments. What is the filmable moment? My whole thing is we as leaders, managers, however you want to phrase it, one of our responsibilities is to create memorable moments. Now, we have thousands of experiences every day. Some of those are memorable. What makes some of them memorable, right? Because when we have memorable moments, it gives us the content to tell stories. And so when I ask leaders the profound question, or I put the statement to them, whether you like it or not, inevitably you are the conversation at dinner tables of the people that work for you at some point, right? How's that going? Well, the stories they're telling aren't based on the words that you wrote or something you said, or they might be because you're not showing them in your behaviors. So I say, get rid of the words. What are the behaviors? When I asked a manager, I told you this the other day, he said, I need you to work with my team. I said, well, what is something you need from them? He said, I think if I had to put it in one thing, it'd be collaboration. And I said, okay. And I could have easily thought, okay, I'm going to go off and talk about collaboration. But instead I stopped and I asked him, what does collaboration mean to you? What does it look like? And he thought for a second and he thought for a second and he kind of struggled. And he said, Robert, I guess I just want them to do what I tell them to do. I kid you not. And it's like, when people say words, they're just words. Walk the walk. Ask them to give a specific example. If I'm coaching, I don't say, oh, well, I show people this. I say, no, give me an example of what you did yesterday. What have you done in the last 7 days to invest in someone? And if they can't give me an example, I say, when we talk next week, I want you to have 3 examples. Because they think they're doing it.
Yeah. You got a great question there, which is, well, so what does that look like? So as a coach helping a leader, and a leader is saying, I'm looking for, in this case, collaboration. And you said, well, what does that look like? That's a great question. What other kind of questions could coaches, they love it. The coaching community love it when we give them some questions to add in that context. What could coaches be asking leaders to help tease some of those things out, do you think?
Lately, it's been, when it comes to things like we're in kind of this new world, I'll ask them to talk about, how did you lead in the past? What were your success? How are you successful in the past? If I've got the picture cards and I'm with them physically, I'll say, pick out a picture, the picture cards of that represents how you led in the past. And one
Can be any pictures, by the
could
way.
be
It
any
doesn't have
picture.
to be
Yeah.
ours cards, but
No,
any
could be
pictures.
any.
Yeah.
Here's 20 pictures, whatever. And they may pick it and they'll tell me what this represents. And then, how are you leading now? What is the difference? Is there a difference? In my opinion, there should be not a major difference, because you shouldn't stray from how you lead authentically, but I think there should be a little bit more leaning towards, I'm showing more compassion. And this is also what I'm hearing when I ask what's been successful for you. I'm showing more compassion. I'm listening more. And then, of course, I get into, okay, so let's look at your strengths. What strengths are you leaning into in order to do that, in order to make that shift? What strengths, all asked in general, when they forget about their strengths because their desk is on fire and they're thinking about all of these other things, I go, okay, let's come back to you. What strengths did you lean into to navigate this disruption? What helped you through it? Because I remember when Jim said, people, I think, will go deeper into their strengths. Some people think, no, you'll go to different strengths. And I think, I don't know. I think you go deeper into the ones that you already have, because that's what our brains do. That's kind of how they're wired. They just go to places that maybe we don't normally go. And then I get them to really think about, where did they lean to get through this? Is it, with me, it was futuristic was probably the number one thing. I had to look towards what it was going to be like at some point, right? And I had to maybe turn down my maximizer because every day was not going to be perfect. So when you get them talking about some of those languages and realizing what did they do to get through it, great. We always like to look back at when we're successful, and then how do you apply that knowledge moving forward, right?
Mhm,
So those
mhm.
are those are some questions that I'll use, just tying them to strengths, but getting them again to always just think about how they've done it in the past, how they're doing it now, and or if they're not, what what needs to happen.
Yeah. I think if I were to take away from what I've heard you saying today, the question that comes to my mind to a leader, to a manager is, what kind of culture are you trying to create? And what does that actually look like?
Yeah.
Like, what are the outcomes of that? What kind of behaviors are you doing, as well as the behaviors of your team? What does that actually mean? I mean, I think that's a long question. I would just say, what kind of culture are you trying to be individually? What kind of leadership culture do you have? Sean asked this great question. I think he says, what would you say is the biggest consistent pitfall this leaders fall into that they don't realize? I mean, some of the problems are pretty obvious. For some leaders, they're not. Robert, you've worked with leaders around the globe. What do you think? So we think about those pitfalls. What are the ones they don't realize and they need help with? They need a coach to maybe help discover some of those. Do you think?
First thing that comes to my mind is listening.
Mm,
They tend to react and go to what they think is best, what they think is right, what they want to happen, and they start focusing on themselves and they take their eyes off of the people. What do the people need, right? I mean, even Q12, it's all about the needs of employees. Well, that is important. A leader's responsibility is to meet the needs of the people. And when they start thinking about their own needs, I get anxiety. I don't feel uncomfortable if I can't see everybody every day. Get over it. Check your ego at the door and think what's best for the people. Maybe they've got situations at home. Maybe they're actually more productive working in a hybrid situation. Have you even taken the time to care or
mhm,
notice? Have you talked to them?
mhm,
Have you asked them? Have you trained your managers how to do that? Right? I get it. A leader can't talk to every person in an organization unless you're in a very small organization, but they definitely can filter down beyond their circle. Because I get a lot of leaders that say, "Oh, well, I communicate that," and I'll ask them, "Who do you communicate that to?" Most of the time, it's to their circle, but
mhm,
they're not taking the time to make sure that's cascading down to others.
mhm,
So I would say that they're not, and sometimes a gentleman president of an organization, a very large organization, new president, he came in, took off the big mahogany doors for the president's office, and ditched the Armani suits and all of the images, and went out and sat in a cube in jeans in the middle of the floor because he wanted to be around the people and have the
mhm,
opportunity to swivel his chair every once in a while and talk to people.
mhm.
That to me is great leadership. And he listened. He was a coach.
Yeah.
I think it's not just managers need to be better coaches, leaders need to be better coaches. Think of
Mhm.
the best leaders in some, think of people like Vince Lombardi's and Phil Knight's. I mean, they weren't just great coaches, they were great leaders of people.
Yeah. No, I love that, this in my head, this idea of listening, because of the clues to what you need to lead and the way you need to lead. The clues are all around you.
Oh
If you're
yeah.
not if you're not listening, you're not picking up on those
Yeah.
clues. Since going back into the office, I've actually been moving my seat around to the various teams that I work with. So sometimes we have enough desks. I can work from anywhere, right? And so I'll spend some time in my old location. I'll go up to the comms team in marketing, which I spent some time with. Now the old team has moved to another floor, and they're saying, "Hey, come up and hang out with us for a while. Like we want you to spend some time. Well, in those moments when I'm there, I hear these conversations that go on. Right now, I'm not directly responsible for those conversations, but if I was, I would. That's the place I would want to be. I would
Yeah.
want to be hearing those things that are around me. Michael has a great question. He says, as a solopreneur coach who's not working with employees but is coaching clients who are leaders, what leadership skills might be the most salient for me to develop? So he's kind of thinking about what kind of skills should I develop when I'm coaching as a solopreneur coach. What do you think?
You know, I would start. I like to start with the four needs of followers.
Mm,
You know, if you think of trust, stability, compassion, and hope, just those four to coach somebody through how are you building trust? What are you doing? Right? How are you showing compassion? You can't create compassion. You can't create hope. You have to build it, right? And so when you start looking at those, how are you providing stability? How is that being communicated? But what's being done that makes people feel more stable? Because when they have to answer the hard questions of what are you doing, what is being done, what is specific, not just, well, I'm thinking about it more, or I'm going to do this, or I've got a plan, or I'm communicating more. What does that mean? More than what? Get specific. But I think the four needs are a great place to start. I mean, we have, you know, seven competencies of great leadership, and they get a little bit more granular into like building relationships, inspiring others. I mean, there's some things that go deeper there, but man, just the four needs. If you can get those right and do those well, y- you're you're going to go so far, you know. And
mhm.
I guess the other thing is getting them to look up and out, because they're so busy. Their desks are so on fire. Their schedules are so crowded that they're not looking out, and they're not walking the floors, and they're not going into the factories. And so I think I would push in that direction if I was coaching somebody. I mean, and I am, and I do.
Yeah. Yeah. No, good advice. Your friend, Dr. Jacqueline Robinson, and I are spending some time thinking about this on the new Clifton Strengths season 2 of the Clifton Strengths podcast by theme. So we're talking about how these themes play leadership or leading roles that work by themes, some things they can look out for, some things that they can enhance, and then how does that fit into the manager report or as a manager is kind of the way I think I might start saying that. And it influenced sales, right? What kind of things do I influence? So there's some resources for you there, Michael, as well. Those will start coming out live here early January on the Clifton Strings podcast channel. That's a shameless plug for that.
Shameless.
Jack Jacqueline does such a great job on that. I
I'm
want to.
looking at my background. I tried to match your background, Jim, and
You
I
did okay.
apologize, folks, if it's a little distracting with this white thing that pops up above my head. But
No worries. No worries.
Jim, I just don't have the fireplace, but I was able to, kind of get the dark
You got
wood and
close.
books in the background for you. So
You got close. I like it. Robert, any final thoughts for you as we kind of wrap this, as we bring this in for a landing? Final thoughts and that you want to leave the audience with?
I guess just I love what you're doing. Thanks for what you're doing. Yeah, the world needs it more than ever right now. Um, I like to think of, when we think of strengths, one of the quotes from MD Arnold, who was a 17th century or 18th century physician and psychologist or psychiatrist, studied mental health early on. His quote was, "As a good leader leads the people from above them, a great leader leads the people from within them."
Mm,
And I think that again comes to this individualization of others, and you're going to get the most out of people when you know them and and can inspire them based upon what inspires them. If you don't think your people are motivated, ask them what motivates them, right?
mm,
If you don't know what inspires them,
yeah.
ask them about someone who's inspired them in the past, and learn what that is. Those are my
I li
closing thoughts.
I like it. I like it. Good stuff. Well, thank you for doing this, Robert. Great to have you back.
Absolutely.
I'll need to figure out a ways to squeeze you back in on the schedule here as we think about 2023. Always great. You're in high demand and very busy.
My
So,
calendars are I'm looking at this morning going, "Oh my gosh, how are we gonna
uh,
juggle all these?"
I
Yeah, anyway,
know.
it's good.
I
It's
know. Well, it's
it's
always
a
great to
good
be with you.
problem to have, right?
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
helping the world.
No, right on, right on. I people have said to me a lot, "Oh, a lot of the great folks you had in 2020, we haven't seen them in a while." And I'm like, they got really busy. And 2020 was a magical for me from a leadership perspective. It was magical because I could bring on we had some time. And
Yeah,
so I could bring on some of the best webcasts we've done, besides this one, was done in 2020
right.
and some great information there. So if you're listening live, I want to remind you to take full advantage of all the resources we do have available. And Robert mentioned a lot of them, including our book, Strengths Based Leadership, still available. If you want to get 4 Needs of Followers, super important. It's available in our store. Go to store.gallup.com for resources and Gallup access. Just head out to gallup.com/Clifton Strengths, log in, hit the resources tab from the menu in the upper left, and we have a ton of stuff for you out there.
Yeah,
So,
shameless plug
yeah.
for Blind Spot. I mean, it really gets
Oh,
down to what's
yep.
happening right now with well-being and what the world is struggling with.
Yeah, and maybe what
Stuff
every
leaders can do.
coach should know about that, right? I think it's as much of a coaching book. We interviewed
Absolutely.
John 4 weeks ago on Call to Coach. That'll be coming, here in a couple weeks, into the Call to Coach channel, but he talks about that directly in Coaches. So,
Good.
yeah, don't miss out on that book. For coaching, master coaching, or if you want to become a Gallup certified strengths coach, you can send us an email or any questions, coaching@gallup.com. Stay up to date on everything that's going on around our webcasts, gallup.eventbrite. Sign up for an account and then follow us, gallup.eventbrite.com. Don't forget to come to the summit. It's virtual and in person this year.
Yeah.
Details, gallupatwork.com. Yeah, maybe I'll get to see you in person for a
Yeah.
change while we're there, which is great. It's going to be as much of a Gallup reunion for a lot of us as it is a summit. Want to thank you for coming out. Oh, by the way, find us anywhere on social by searching Clifton Strengths. Want to thank you for coming out and joining us today and appreciate your conversations. Have a great week, everybody. And with that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.
All right. Take care. Be well.